So a US military court just ruled that bump stocks are not machine guns. So let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you think that the ATF should be abolished, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. I also want to give a shout out to one of the main supporters of the channel, and that is Route 66 Shooting Sports Park down in San Bernardino. If you came out to the recent Armed in May event, you know how amazing that range is, how amazing the staff is. So if you're in the Southern California area, I highly recommend you check them out. And thank you Route 66 for supporting this channel. I also want to let you know that this content is powered by the Firearms Policy Coalition, so head on over to joinfbc.org to help support the Second Amendment cause. Thank you again, Firearms Policy Coalition, for supporting this channel. So like I said in the intro, a military court just ruled that bump stocks are not machine guns. So the case we're going to be talking about in this video is United States v. Ali Al-Zag, and I'm probably getting that wrong, but that is the case. And it is a Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals case. And in this case, the Court of Criminal Appeals dismissed a charge from an individual possessing a bump stock, and they found that the device did not come within the statutory definition of what a machine gun is. So first, let's look at some background surrounding this case and also the ATF's regulation of bump stocks. So for many years, the ATF had correctly concluded that the NFA and the GCA's definition of the term machine gun does not include devices like bump stocks. However, after the tragic events in Las Vegas in 2017, the ATF, after being ordered by former President Trump, decided to arbitrarily change the regulatory definition of machine gun so that bump stocks would be considered to be machine guns. This new rule took effect on March 26th of 2019. Therefore, under federal law, owners of bump stocks were required to either destroy the devices or to surrender them over to the ATF prior to the effective date of that new rule. This sudden change in definition made possessors of bump stocks potentially subject to a punishment of 10 years in prison and or a $250,000 fine if they did not destroy or surrender the devices over to the government. Now, in this specific case, Mr. Ali was an E2 in the Marine Corps, and he was stationed in Hawaii. In 2019, about 2 months after the safe harbor to surrender bump stocks had expired, he went on leave to visit his parents in Nebraska. When he was going on his leave, he had a fellow Marine drive him to the airport, and he got a call from his supervisor when they were driving to the airport, and he was told during this call that he did not properly check out his property. After ending this call, this is kind of where things start to go bad. After he ends the call with his sergeant, he made comments to this Marine who was driving him that he would shoot up the shop if he got more negative paperwork filed on him because he did not properly check out when he left. Well, after hearing these comments and after getting back to the base, I guess this fellow Marine decided to report these comments to his unit. And the unit responded by listing Mr. Ali in an unauthorized leave status and reported his threats of violence. These threats were then sent to the Department of Defense and other law enforcement agencies as well. Now, while he was on leave in Nebraska, he was near an Air Force base that was kind of close to where he was staying, and he decided to go to that base on multiple occasions to go and work out. On one instance, when he showed up to that base to go to work out, he arrived at the gate and he was pretty much denied access, and essentially because he was flagged in the system, and then he was arrested on the spot. During this arrest, his vehicle was searched at the gate, and in his vehicle they found some pistols, a rifle, some ammunition, body armor, a suppressor, and as well they found the big issue in this case, which was bump stocks. The very next day, the ATF and the NCIS agents who were assigned to this situation decided to pay his parents a visit at their home. They visited the home, and unfortunately, the father, Mr. Ali, gave the agents permission to search his son's room, closet, and he even went as far as opening the safe that Mr. Ali had in his room for these agents. And in his room, these agents also found some switches that could be used on semi-automatic pistols to make them fully automatic. Because of this arrest, because of them finding these firearms and bump stocks in his vehicle, as well as these switches in his room, he was then arrested and escorted back to Hawaii, where he was tried for various violations, including being in possession of a machine gun under 26 USC section 5845 subsection B, which defines a machine gun. He ultimately signed a plea deal, and part of that plea deal is he pled guilty to being in possession of a machine gun, along with some other charges as well. Then after this, he decided to seek a dismissal of those guilty pleas, and he included in that the definition of a machine gun that the ATF was using was not correct, and that these bump stocks did not fall under that definition. And so that leads us here to this court's decision and the appeal that was happening here, and ultimately the determination of this appeal court. Now, in reaching their determination, this military court here focused on two primary things. First, that Chevron deference does not apply when you're dealing with criminal statutes like the one here. They also then found that the rule of lenity is a better kind of canon of construction when you're looking at these types of issues. So first, let's take a look at this whole discussion of Chevron deference. Now, first and foremost, some of you are probably asking yourself, what does Chevron deference mean? What is this discussing? What is this all about? Chevron deference is a term coined after a landmark case from the Supreme Court, which is Chevron USA Inc. v. Natural Resources Defense Council Inc. And this is referring to the doctrine of judicial deference given to administrative actions. Now, how does that apply here in this case? Well, the issue and ambiguity here in this case is in regards to the term machine gun and what type of deference should be given to the ATF's interpretation of that term. And even more so, an issue is that if Chevron deference can even be used when you're dealing with statutes that have a criminal penalty component. Keep in mind, the NFA and the GCA have criminal penalties attached to them, including, like we mentioned, a 10-year imprisonment and also $250,000 fines. So, based on the interpretation that the ATF has, there could be potentially very severe felony and criminal penalties attached to them. And the question is, and the question for a lot of courts is, what type of deference should be allowed to agencies like the ATF when you're dealing with statutes that have these types of criminal components and punishments attached to them? If Chevron was allowed in ambiguous statutes with criminal implications, then the ATF or other agencies would be allowed to first create criminal laws through their interpretation of vague statutes, then 2, enforce its own newly created interpretations, and then 3, finally, they would get to receive judicial deference from courts anytime their actions were challenged based on their interpretations. The military court here in review found that the term of machine gun is indeed ambiguous. They stated that because of the plausibility of either shooter-focused or the mechanical reading, we find the statute with respect to the meaning of by single function of the trigger and automatically is ambiguous. So they found specifically when you look at the definition, the by the single function of the trigger or automatically, they found that those two sections are ambiguous, but also, although they found that this term is ambiguous, they also then went on to rule that the rule of lenity requires a finding that bump stocks are not under the definition of what a machine gun is. So now let's take a look at their application and use of the rule of lenity instead of Chevron deference. So the rule of lenity, for those of you who don't know, is also called the rule of strict construction. And this is a principle of criminal statutory interpretation that requires a court to apply any unclear or ambiguous law in a manner that is most favorable to a defendant. So here, the interpretation of the definition of a machine gun does involve criminal penalties like we discussed. And also, therefore, the rule of lenity would direct this court and other courts to interpret the ambiguous statute in the person's favor, not the ATF's. The court here then went on to quote that Judge Henry Friendly described the rule of lenity as the instinctive distaste against men languishing in prison unless the lawmaker has clearly said they should. Here we express that same distaste. And then they went on to conclude that the charges against Mr. Ali for being in possession of a machine gun was not proper because bump stocks do not fall under that definition. Now, one thing I want to note is that this case is not binding precedent on other civil courts, but instead can be cited as persuasive arguments. And likely what will happen is, and I would not be surprised if you see this case cited pop up as persuasive arguments in other cases like the GOA 6th Circuit bump stock case, or the Apostolian Supreme Court bump stock case, or other bump stock cases that pop up after the fact, or even what this case is really good for and is very persuasive on would be other challenges as well. Other challenges to other ATF interpretations, like the recent ATF interpretations on frames and receivers, with their proposed rules on frames and receivers, and also their interpretation and proposed rules on pistol braces. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and comment down below and I'll try to answer the best of my ability. Also, if you like this video and like support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, or fuel Al Gore's rhythm, or Fuel Al Gore's jet if you hate the whole fuel the algorithm thing. I know some of you are smashing away at your keyboard saying, oh, the fuel the algorithm, that's not funny anymore. Hey, I don't make the rules, the comment section does. So all those things help to fuel the algorithm. It signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos, in this type of two-way news, and then it pushes it to more people. So thank you to everybody who supported the channel, who's liked, commented, subscribed, who has hit the notification bell. That really does help these videos, and we have reached over 180,000 subscribers, and we're quickly marching towards 200,000 subscribers. So thank you guys so much for all the support. So as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and never forget this is built by Arm Scholars, and it's nation we maintain by Arm Scholars.